It starts the same way almost every Tuesday night in American family life. You are driving home from practice, 3 hungry kids in the back, and the dashboard clock says you have about 20 minutes before everyone hits a wall. The nearest exit has a row of glowing signs, and your brain does what every parent brain does in that moment. It does not pick the best option. It picks the fastest, familiar option, the one your family has defaulted to for years, the one whose logo feels like a small piece of normal life on a chaotic weekday. That decision is the entire reason this video matters, because underneath the drive-through window, the menu has changed a lot more than the sign has. And the gap between those two things is now wider than almost any shopper realizes. Over the last several years, the fast food aisle has quietly split into two very different worlds, and most families have no idea which one they are actually pulling into. On one side, chains have leaned heavily into ultra-processed formulations, vague sourcing language, and ingredient lists that read less like food and more like a chemistry inventory. On the other side, a smaller group of chains has done the opposite, simplifying menus, publishing real disclosures, and making the family meal less of a gamble. The gap between those two worlds is wider than it has ever been, and it is widening every quarter. The goal of this video is not to make you afraid of fast food. The goal is to walk through the actual decision a parent makes on the way to the window, name the 10 chains where the trust gap between sign and tray is widest in 2026, and then show you 6 chains that genuinely earn the family vote. You will finish this with a simple reusable checklist that works at any drive-thru in the country, regardless of which chain you happen to be parked at. Let us start at the moment of decision, because that is where the trap is set. The first thing your brain does is read the sign. A red and yellow sign reads as familiar comfort, and the smiling clown out front has been printed into the back of your retinas since childhood. A torch-lit red sign reads as a quick certainty, the kind you pick when the kids are loud and you just want the order to be obvious. A purple and yellow sign reads as a polite default, the one that feels like the most reasonable middle ground when nobody in the car can agree. The color, the font, the smiling mascot on the menu board, all of that runs a shortcut your family has been trained on since car seat days. And that shortcut is the entire reason so many chains can get away with so much at the window. By the time you read the menu, your wallet is already half open. Here is the first checkpoint you need to add. Before you order, ask one question. Can I see this chain's full published ingredient list, including the dressings, sauces, sides, and the bread, without downloading a PDF or calling a customer service hotline? Some chains make this easy. Many do not. California now requires allergen disclosure on menus, but ingredient disclosure is still voluntary in most states, which means the chains that publish real lists are doing it on purpose, and the chains that hide behind vague categories are doing that on purpose too. The library a chain maintains is itself a signal, and your job as the buyer is to notice which category your chain falls into before the kids have picked their toy. Checkpoint number 2. Kid menu audit. Look not at the toy, look at what is actually being sold at the smaller price point. A grilled chicken bites plate with actual fruit and milk is not the same as a deep-fried breaded nugget set with a sugary drink and a cinnamon sugar dessert as the default. Some chains have quietly engineered kids' meals that look balanced on the menu board and behave like dessert once the tray arrives. Other chains publish real protein, real vegetable sides, and beverages that are not loaded with sugar. The kids' meal is where families form every eating habit for the next decade, so this is the spot to slow down and actually look. A quick rule of thumb here is simple. If the kids' basket reads like a dessert menu with a protein garnish, the chain is using the kid price point to move sugar, not to build a meal. Now let us walk through 10 fast food spots where, in this current landscape, the gap between what the sign sells and what the tray delivers is widest. I am going to name these in the order a tired parent might actually encounter them along the exit ramp. The first chain worth pausing on is McDonald's, and this is going to sound surprising, because McDonald's is the chain most people trust by default, the one parents name first when asked what their kids like best. The reality in 2026 is that the McDonald's menu looks bigger, behaves faster, and reads simpler than it actually is, once you pull the ingredient panels apart. Frying oils, dairy-based dessert fillers in the shakes and pies, the McRib appearance schedule that keeps a heavily processed formulation off the boards most of the year, and a long list of regional limited-time creations mean that the menu is doing a lot more than the drive-through audio lets on. Antibiotic policies on chicken are strong, beef sourcing is dominated by commodity supply from many producers, and the ingredient queue on several signature items is longer than most home cooks would tolerate in their own pantry. The chain has improved transparency meaningfully in the last decade, but the family eating experience is still built on a foundation of ultra-processed assembly. If McDonald's is your default, treat it as the option that earns its order each time, not the option that deserves it automatically. Second is Burger King, the most quietly controversial chain for a long time. Burger King was famously late to publish a real ingredient list. Even after publishing, the list drew heavy scrutiny. Look at the bun. It contains potassium iodate, a dough conditioner that is restricted or banned in several countries over thyroid concerns. Look at the mayonnaise. It is closer to a laboratory shortcut than a kitchen condiment. The chain has trimmed its published blacklist and removed some additives over the years, and that is real progress. But the ones that remain are the kind that show up in smaller, less obvious categories. The sauces and the bun conditioners that most parents never ask about. Combined with aggressive value menu pricing that nudges families toward the most processed basket in the store, Burger King is the textbook example of a chain whose menu pretends to be premium and whose ingredient queue quietly walks back that pretend. Third is Chick-fil-A, and yes, the chain with the strongest customer service reputation in the category still needs to be on this list, because reputation is not the same thing as ingredient clarity. The chicken sandwich ingredient list is a famous case study, containing roughly 50 ingredients, including polysorbate, dimethyl polysiloxane, which is technically an anti-foaming agent used in industrial fryer operations, plus sodium aluminum phosphate and potassium iodate. The customer experience is second to none, and the cleanliness standard is the envy of the industry, and all of that matters to a tired parent. But the formulation gap between what the smiling cow on the bag suggests and what the actual ingredient panel reveals is unusually wide. If your family is choosing Chick-fil-A for the chicken, take a few minutes to look at the real list, because the difference between the grilled nuggets and the classic breaded sandwich is genuinely significant, and most parents do not realize how wide that gap is until they pull up the panel side by side. Fourth is Taco Bell, a chain that lives in a different kind of trust gap. Taco Bell has invested heavily in publishing ingredient disclosures and has walked away from MSG, which is a real transparency move that took industry pressure to deliver. The issue is not the disclosure. The issue is the formulation itself, what the disclosure actually shows once you read it. Many of the core menu items rely on silicon dioxide as a processing aid, modified cornstarch, sodium phosphates, and a long list of texture agents designed to keep the food stable across long holding times. For an adult making an individual choice, that trade is reasonable. For a family feeding children several times a month, it is the kind of formulation that compounds over time. Taco Bell earns credit for disclosure, but loses points for what the disclosure actually shows once you read past the marketing. Fifth is Wendy's. The signature brand promise for decades has been fresh, never frozen beef, and the chain has worked hard to defend that claim. The unsolved trust gap is in the rest of the menu, where the beef story stops being the story. Chicken supply is partially frozen and partially fresh depending on location, and the chicken disclosure has been less rigorous than the beef claim. Cheese product formulations carry their own cues. The Frosty line is built around a sugar-dairy composite that has very little to do with the beef narrative. When a parent pulls into Wendy's trusting the beef story, they often leave with a tray that includes multiple item types, and those additional items are where the formulation gets complicated. The brand reads as fresher than it actually delivers across the whole menu. Sixth is Arby's. Arby's has spent decades leaning on a roast beef narrative, and the actual ingredient list for the classic roast beef is short and reasonable, mostly beef, water, salt, and sodium phosphates. That is the good news, and the original product is genuinely one of the simplest in the category. The bad news is that most of the menu is not roast beef, processed cheese slices on the melts, pit-smoked ham with its own queue of additives, sauces that read more like dressing than sandwich topping, plus a rotating line of giant loaded items that push the family toward the highest calorie, highest sodium options on the board. The chain effectively sells one credible product surrounded by a wide ring of items built for taste impact rather than ingredient simplicity. Seventh is Popeyes. The chicken sandwich phenomenon made Popeyes a family default almost overnight, and the marination of the chicken is genuinely part of the brand promise, a real 12-hour process that gives the meat its flavor. The gap is in the breading and the hold time formula. Popeyes has historically used microcrystalline cellulose in the batter, a refined wood pulp-derived texturizer that is common in fast food, but rarely what a parent envisions when they hear the words hand-breaded. The chain has also been more aggressive than most competitors in rotating limited-time items that push the ultra-processed assembly even further. The flavor is real. The formulation distance between that flavor and a home-cooked equivalent is also real, and that is the part most parents never see until they read what is actually inside the breading. Eighth is Subway, and the bread conversation has never fully gone away. Subway removed azodicarbonamide years ago, which was a real transparency victory after a public petition pushed the change through. But the bread formulation has continued to carry more dough conditioners than most home loaves, plus sodium and sugar in the ferment process. Add in rotation sauces, processed cheese slices, and a cold-cut program that includes several items with additive lists longer than the protein itself, and you get a chain whose healthy halo runs ahead of its actual lineup. The ability to customize helps a lot, but customization is only as good as the parts you are choosing between, and too many of those parts at Subway are built for shelf life rather than ingredient clarity. Ninth is KFC. The original recipe is balanced through seasoning and pressure cooking rather than heavy breading chemistry, which is a quiet advantage that most chains do not get. The Colonel's 11 herbs and spices are basically a flavor story, not a filler story, and the chicken itself is the simplest item on the menu. The challenge is in the surrounding basket. Sides are highly processed, beverages default to sugary options, the kids' meal structure is built around fried portions, and the formulation chain across the menu is built to support a high-volume fried operation rather than a clean family meal. When a family orders at KFC, the chicken alone is a more reasonable choice than at several competitors, but the full tray drifts quickly into excess once the biscuits, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and beverages arrive at the same time. 10th is Jack in the Box, the widest gap of all. Jack in the Box runs one of the most extensive menus in fast food, which means the ingredient queue across the menu is also one of the longest, and the chain has historically led the industry in late-night limited-time launches that push the formulation much further than the daytime menu suggests. Family baskets almost never match the simplified version of the meal most parents pictured on the drive-in, because the menu invites add-ons across every category, and the value meals tend to default toward fried. If you are choosing a chain specifically because you want to manage what your kids are actually consuming, Jack in the Box is the one most likely to break that plan before the car even pulls out of the parking lot. That is 10 chains. Some of them are still genuinely fine for an adult making a single decision, and this video is not interested in pretending otherwise. All of them have a meaningful trust gap when the customer is a family buying a basket several times a month. Now here is the relief part of the aisle, and this matters, because the point of naming the 10 is not to make you avoid every drive-through window in the country. The point is to make the drives you do choose worth it, and to make the choice feel like a choice rather than a reflex. Let us walk through 6 chains where the family vote is genuinely earned in 2026. The chain you would recommend to another parent if they asked you which drive-through you actually trust. First recommend is Chipotle, the chain that did the most to actually push the category toward real disclosure over the last decade. The Food with Integrity program started as marketing language, then became an actual supply chain requirement, including responsibly raised meat where labeling allows, dairy without added hormones, and a real food print tracker that publishes sourcing outcomes year over year. The kids' meal at Chipotle is genuinely built around protein, vegetables, beans, and rice, with optional fruit and milk sides rather than a mandatory dessert and sugary drink. The custom build lets a parent cut sodium, sugar, and ultra-processed shortcuts without sacrificing flavor, because the build is the order and the build is yours. For families who want real transparency and a kids menu that does not look like dessert at the window, Chipotle is the strongest default in the category. It is also the easiest chain to teach an older kid how to build a meal on their own, because the customization maps directly to the ingredient panel, and that builds label literacy the next time the family is staring down a grocery shelf together. Second recommend is In-N-Out. This one is not available everywhere, which limits its role as a national default, but if you live within the service area, it deserves the top of the family list. In-N-Out still ships fresh beef daily, hand-cuts fries from whole potatoes in stores, makes its patties from 100% Uzda chuck with no fillers or preservatives, and publishes a short, readable ingredient list that does not require a chemistry translation. The kids' meal is small and honest, with hamburger, cheeseburger, or plain grilled cheese options, real fries cut in the store, and a milk or juice side, and the parent can read almost the entire menu line by line without needing a research tool. The chain is the clearest example of the keep it simple, keep it real philosophy. And that matters because it means the trust gap your family is auditing at the window simply does not exist there in any meaningful form. Third recommend is Five Guys. Five Guys earns its place because it does three things very well. It freezes nothing in any meaningful category. It discloses allergen and peanut information clearly and publicly online, and it lets a parent customize a burger with toppings that are all recognizable as real food. The chain publishes a full allergen guide and updates it regularly, which is the kind of disclosure most competitors hide behind a hotline number. The portion size is generous, which is a real value signal for families feeding older kids, and the kitchen assembly is visible from the dining area, which closes the trust gap by default. For families with allergy concerns, Five Guys is one of the safer defaults in the broader category. Fourth recommend is Qdoba. Qdoba has quietly moved toward the cleanest ingredient set among the big Mexican-style chains without making a marketing event out of it. The brand publishes a real food philosophy page, removes MSG and artificial colors from the menu, and structures the protein options around grilled vegetables. The kids' menu is small but balanced. The vegetables are included by default rather than billed as an upcharge, and the customization lets a parent skip the heavy cheese and sour cream load that most Mexican fast menus default toward. Qdoba is a chain that quietly earned the family vote by simplifying instead of expanding its menu, and the discipline shows up at the window. Fifth recommend is Jason's Deli. Jason's Deli does not fit the standard fast food template because it is a counter-service deli rather than a drive-through, but it operates at family meal frequency and price in most markets. The chain has removed MSG from its recipes, removed artificial trans fats from its kitchen, and built the menu around whole deli meats, real cheeses, and a wide range of fresh fruit, soup, and salad options. The kids' menu includes hand-cut fruit and several protein options that are not breaded or fried, which is the kind of choice most parents have to construct manually at the other chains on this list. For families who treat fast food as a regular weekly meal rather than an occasional treat, Jason's Deli is one of the closest things in the category to a home-cooked alternative you can still pick up in 15 minutes. Sixth recommend is MOD Pizza. MOD closes the recommend list because it does the thing every other chain claims and rarely delivers. It publishes a full allergen and ingredient list online, lets you build a personal pizza from a wide range of real toppings, and has a kids' meal that is genuinely small, genuinely balanced, and genuinely visible in its ingredients. The chain also offers a gluten-friendly crust option, vegan cheese, and a wide vegetable spread, which closes the customization gap for families with gluten or dairy concerns. The dining model is not as fast as a drive-through, but for the family meal, the trade is worth it. You sit down, the kids pick their toppings, and what arrives at the table is the build you actually ordered. Now that we have covered all 16 chains, let us turn the 10 avoid and 6 recommend chains into a reusable framework so you can walk into any drive-thru in the country and make the call yourself, even when the chain you pull into is not one of the 16 we named. Framework number 1. Read the sign, then read the disclosure. If the chain cannot show you its full ingredient list within 2 clicks of its homepage, that is your first signal. Disclosure is not a marketing claim. It is a library. And if the library is empty or buried, walk. Framework number 2. Audit the kids' meal, not the toy. Protein, vegetable, fruit, water, or milk as the default. If the default kids basket fails that audit, modify the basket yourself or move to a different chain, because the meal that forms habits is the baseline meal, not the modified one. Framework number 3. Check the holding time. Fast food is engineered for throughput, which means holding. The longer a product can sit without losing shape, the more processing aids it is likely carrying. Items that arrive at the window freshly made are almost always simpler than items staged in a heat bin. When in doubt, ask what was just made, because the answer tells you the real menu. Framework number 4. Read the allergen guide, not just the menu. Allergen disclosure is the leading edge of ingredient disclosure in this country, and California has now required it on menus, with other states likely to follow in the next couple of years. If a chain discloses allergens responsibly, you can usually trust the rest, because the discipline of that disclosure rarely stops at allergens. If it hides allergens behind a hotline, that hiding is a signal about the rest of the menu too, and a strong one at that. Framework number 5. Watch the rotation. Limited time items are almost always the place where processing gets pushed the furthest, because the offer has to perform on taste impact and shelf stability, not on ingredient clarity. Chains that quietly drop a new item every 6 weeks are chains that do not want your attention on the rotation. Families should hold the line on the rotation and pick from the steady menu, which is where the formulation work is most often visible. Framework number 6. Read the oil. Vegetable oil blends, seed oils, fryer oils that are reused across the day. None of this is a verdict on its own, but a chain that defaults to a heavy fry basket across every menu category is a chain that is built around crisp rather than ingredient quality. Choose items that are grilled, roasted, or steamed rather than fried whenever the menu allows, because that single change shifts almost every basket dramatically. Framework number 7. Look for the sourcing sentence. Real sourcing language is specific. Local, named farms, named program definitions, published audits, tracked percentages. Vague sourcing language is a sentence with no noun. If the chain cannot tell you what the chicken was fed or where the beef was raised, treat that absence as an ingredient in the meal you are about to order, because the absence is doing real work. Framework number 8. Track your own basket. Write down what your family actually ordered for 2 weeks. Total fried items, total breaded items, total beverages, total dessert items. The tray tells the truth even when the menu board does not, and most families are surprised by what their own receipts actually say once they start tracking. Framework number 9. Use the substitute. Most chains now publish a grilled version of the same product they bread and fry. Choose the grilled version when you can. The grill line on the receipt is the simplest cheat code in the entire category, and it costs almost nothing in flavor while it changes the formulation picture substantially. Framework number 10. Match the chain to the moment. A road trip with teens is not a Tuesday night with a 5-year-old. A birthday treat is not a weekly meal. Different moments call for different chains, and the framework gives you the language to make that call without guilt. Now here is the simplest possible shortcut for a tired parent. Think of the fast food category as 3 tiers. The avoid tier is the chains with the widest gap between sign and tray, where the kids' meal default is built around the highest process options and the disclosure is either missing or weak. The choose carefully tier includes chains with real disclosure but heavy processing inside specific product families, where the family basket needs active construction to stay clean. The trust tier is the small set of chains that publish real ingredients, Keep the kids' menu balanced, and build the family meal around simple, recognizable food. The avoid tier is roughly the 10 we covered. The choose carefully tier is most of the rest. The trust tier is the 6 we covered. The daily decision gets much easier once those 3 tiers are clear in your head, because the work shifts from evaluating a chain every time to evaluating the moment and matching it to the tier. If your family has been defaulting to one of the 10 avoid chains for years, this is not a guilt scenario. Most parents are picking from the sign, not from the ingredient panel, and that is by design. It is exactly why the sign exists, why the mascots are friendly, and why the menu boards are organized to push the higher margin items at eye level. The point of this video is to give you a list that lives in your head the next time you are on the exit ramp, so the decision moves from automatic to intentional, and the tray that arrives at the kitchen table reflects the family you actually are, not the family the chain assumes you are. You do not need to memorize a single ingredient to use this. You need to remember that the sign is a marketing surface, the disclosure is a library, the kids' meal is a habit, and the basket is a record. Those 4 things are enough. Here is what I would love to hear in the comments. Pick the chain that is your current default. Tell me what your family usually orders, and tell me what you found when you actually read the ingredient panel. If your kitchen has its own version of this list with chains I missed, post it. If you disagree with one of the 6 recommendations because your region has a hidden gem option I did not cover, post that too. And if there is another category you want me to walk through the same way, a cereal aisle, a yogurt aisle, a condiment shelf, leave it below with as much detail as you can, because the drive-through is just the first stop. The supermarket aisle is the next, and the only way to keep up with how fast the category is changing underneath us is to keep comparing notes with families who are actually pulling into the window and reading what is on the receipt, because once the window opens, the choice is yours, and now you know how to make it.